Sausages, 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 sausages. Too many sausages, not enough sausages. Oh my god, the sausage party is now. Okay, welcome back to another episode of Hand Tool Rescue. Today we have a 1920s paint sprayer, as the forklift notified you. This was found by me at some point in the past, is all I can say, because I don't remember where or specifically when I got this. And to top that off, there's not a lot about this paint sprayer online either. I have found very limited photos and probably even more limited information on not only this sprayer, but this entire company. I don't understand why it has been lost in time, but that's just what happens to some companies. It was a very neat looking, or it still is, a very neat looking paint sprayer slash compressor thing. And it immediately caught my eye, so I wanted to pick it up because I've never really seen anything exactly like this before. And apparently neither has the internet. So once again, I've come across something that is just hard to identify without honestly going to a real library like the Smithsonian library and seeing what's up there. But anyways, this paint sprayer works with essentially two pumps in tandem that slowly push a light amount of air for something like an airbrush style paint spraying apparatus at the end of the air line here. So it's not a heavy duty crazy paint sprayer for finishing a car. It's just, just enough for doing, I don't know if it was stuff around the house, but it was made, and that's what its purpose was for. As you can see, I'm keeping the gaskets wet because, once again, I'm always concerned about asbestos exposure. The gaskets might not even contain any asbestos whatsoever, but maybe they do, and I just don't want to take that risk. So keeping them wet really reduces the chance of those asbestos fibers going airborne. So the machine does actually move. I was horrified to think about it being completely seized and rusted to hell when I opened this up, but it seems to be not the case, which is fantastic. It makes everybody's job easier when things aren't murdered. Although some parts of this paint sprayer are heavily pitted, so it was exposed to maybe just water, and that's why the aluminum parts are okay. I'm not really sure. You could see the bottom here, how heavily pitted the steel frame slash base that this thing sits on is. It's just brutal, so I'll have to deal with that. And these little papery gaskets, which are probably just pure asbestos waiting to kill me, are just there to hold the oil in place. There isn't even anything else stopping the oil from leaking out the bottom of this thing. So I'm assuming this thing sucked in a lot of oil every time it was used. The other easier part about this specific tool is that we have essentially a mirrored casting here. So all of the parts are fairly similar inside each half, and that makes the disassembly and reassembly much easier than I'm used to. And sometimes it's just nice to not restore an entire washing machine. And there's the moment of truth to see if something is damaged or worn in the most critical of parts. But this shaft looks amazing, honestly. It came out easily and it was fairly polished. And I'm not seeing massive amounts of wear. So that's really nice. I was concerned essentially on, who owned this before or when it was last actually used. You know, for something this old, the inside honestly looks amazing. So I'm happy to see that kind of stuff for once. Maybe this was used more recently than 100 years ago. I don't know. You could see the top of that flathead screw there. It is a little worn, meaning that someone else was in here at some point in the last 100 years. Maybe to replace this red rubber gaskety diaphragm thing. Maybe that was just something that was part of general maintenance for this machine after so many hours. Because I'm not exactly sure, the amazing technology of rubber 100 years ago. So maybe this is a replacement gasket from the 60s. I have no idea how long this company was in business. It's very frustrating when I can't find that info, but what can you do? The little washer spring thing that I just played around with was blued, meaning that it's some type of hardened steel that was tempered down to an exact temperature where the steel oxidized and it turned blue. So that will be removed by the evaporest. So I am going to keep that separate when I go to dunk the tools or the tool parts in, as I don't want to lose that bluing. The bluing is not common on a lot of old tools in terms of their survival rate to now. Bluing was done all the time for tools back then. It just never seems to survive that long. For some reason, if this tool ever overheated and that washer started heating up, the bluing would completely change and to some other color and be gone. So I'm going to try to preserve that. I'll just clean it up with steel wool. It's not the most critical part anyways, but if you do encounter tools with some bluing on them, I recommend trying to preserve that as much as possible. The back cap iron on a lot of hand planes, specifically Stanley ones, were blued, and they are worth more money if you keep that blue steel intact. Here's the fantastic brass label, and I always love all of these. I can see just a little bit of the red paint in the Spraymore area. So it looks like a black and red brass label. And I'm actually going to do something I haven't done in a while, or I think ever on this channel, which is fully remake the brass tag in the exact same method, or close to the same method as it was done at the time this machine was made. So it'll be something that you can try at home if you really want to go for it. It's actually very simple. This entire pipe here needs to be replaced. It's heavily pitted, so I'm taking all the brass parts off of it, even the soldered ones. They're coming off because I need to remachine the entire pipe. It's got to be done. Look at that pitting, just extreme pitting. It's basically a mogul hill for ants, okay? So I'm just going to desolder these and chuck the pipe because I don't need it anymore. This pipe is literally Schedule 40 piping, like the piping that people are making a lot of furniture legs out of. That's exactly the same pipe, same wall thickness, same ID and same OD. So very easy to replace for me personally. There are all the parts, of course, at once. You got to get that shot to see what you've done. Every time I take that shot with the camera, I just think, what have I done? Why do I do this? Because it's amazing and it's fun. I'm just pre-cleaning these so the evaporest doesn't have to work so hard to get to where it needs to go. Even though those are aluminum pieces, I just don't want it floating around in the evaporest there. You can check if things are aluminum or magnesium by hitting them with a dot of vinegar. If they're magnesium, the vinegar will start bubbling and reacting. If it is magnesium, if there's a casting that's magnesium, for the love of God, do not put it in the evaporest. It will turn into powder within a few hours, and you will cry. You will cry greatly. And then you'll call me and say, hey, oh my God, you didn't tell me. But I did. These will just get a stone wash and essentially a very light polish with those small stones. And that should give a nice consistent look. I don't need to go crazy polished on that aluminum casting, as the other parts are going to be fairly highly polished. This is my sensual French 1903 anvil. It is amazing and very tiny, and I love it. Tiny little bench anvils are incredibly useful, and I've thought a lot about just ordering a bunch of them and selling them on the website for people just so they can get some hands on them, because they're not that common really. And I end up using it, as you've seen in a bunch of videos, all the time. I will Bondo the pitted areas aggressively, just to make it look like it's not destroyed. I would have remade this whole piece, but those little grooves there right in the middle are kind of hard for me to do with the tools I have, so I'm just going to have to fix the original. I went with 3 coats of black and 2 coats of clear this time, to make it look nice and shiny. So the piping I just cut to length and then sanded it up the grits. This final belt is actually 3,000 grit. It's a knife sharpening belt that I'm just slowly applying my sensual touch to the pipe, and then I'll polish that off later. I broke this off at the start of the video, so I'm going to re-solder it back on so that I can get the pitting off of this with a heavier grit belt. This was a 320 grit belt, and I'll just slowly work my way. I don't want to go in with, you know, like an 80 or even like a 40 grit would be insane. So I'm just taking my time so that the polishing isn't 900 years. I'll go with a black heavy cutting polishing compound to really get all the marks off I possibly can, and to get it to a reasonable shine. I'm not that guy that's gonna make it so you can see my entire life history in the reflection of the steel. I also get to use my amazing new Bridgeport for this exact purpose. My setup might be a little bit interesting, but it works, and that's all I needed in this case. I could not pull this off on my drill presses because they're used as horrendous wire wheeling machines. And the run out on the drill chuck of my main wire wheel drill press thing is just ridiculous. So not appropriate. So the Bridgeport is going to come in handy in the future. Big time. This is also the ideal situation when you need to drill multiple holes in line with each other. So I could just, you know, move the table of the Bridgeport, and now I'm perfectly in line on the pipe, exactly where I was before, which is what I need in my life. So that's done. I'll finish polishing that up off camera and deburring and blah blah blah, and that should suffice. So that part that I was just doing before, the brass part, it wasn't rusty, and I don't know what it was. I think it might actually be stainless steel, because it's not magnetic, and it's not just zinc or anything. It's really odd. Anyways, when I looked at the photos, the few photos that I actually did find, there's only one example, and it's 5 photos of like one example of this tool. It seemed to be that the screws were slightly polished, not as much as the rest of it. So I got really close to what I think was original there. And then I called it a day on all the fasteners. I'm also just gluing these on with some JB Weld, like just clean off the excess, and that should be fine. I could solder it, but I just didn't want to. How's that? Just didn't feel like it. I need to also remake these. These are the most pitted bolts in the history of pitted bolts. It's a little odd. It doesn't exist as something you can just go to the store and buy, so I have to make it. Found the appropriate bolt size and thread, and then just tapped the top of it after I chopped the head off, and I'll be able to screw in an acorn nut that I bought that is chrome polish / plated. And that will look fantastic. And then there you have one. I will Loctite that acorn nut on, and it'll be fine. So you can actually get the bolt off. I also bought a specialty tap just to thread the piping here. It was like 11/16 16 thread, which basically doesn't exist in most normal set of taps and dies that you buy. So I bought that and tapped it, and that was totally fine. So the pipe is pretty much completely remade at this point, which is nice since it was a disaster. This is the top diaphragm where you can see a little bit of the air. That spring, that blued spring washer thing is what keeps it just open enough to allow air to flow in and out, or mostly in, no, mostly out, I guess, and into the pipe. I also ordered some fabric reinforced oil resistant rubber. Not all rubber is oil resistant, so please make sure you get the correct one. And I got the fabric reinforcing only because this is going up and down 1,200 trillion times. And that seemed to be what the original was as well. So I might as well do what the designers did. Everything is getting aggressively oiled as always during assembly. The oil is 30 weight non-detergent. And that's basically similar to air compressor oil, or like a mineral oil pretty much. It's very basic, it's just oil. There are no fancy additives. And that's just in case those newer modern additives don't do so well with these older materials. Alrighty, so there's one essentially mostly complete. I'm hoping that this new rubber diaphragm here can move enough and stretch enough to create some air pumping action. If, you know, I did all this and I put it back together and turned it on and not a lot of air was coming out, I would have been very disappointed because not a lot of other options for what type of material I could have used there. I would have ended up buying lots of different weird stuff and just seeing what kind of diaphragm would work. It would have been a lot more work and research on that one. There's also this little metal ring and a very small circular gasket that I remade. I'm not exactly sure, maybe just for air pressure reasons why that gasket is there. But everything that was previously there just has to get remade. It's the way she goes. I kind of wish I had like a laser cutter or something fancy to remake gaskets perfectly. Because I end up getting into some odd shaped gaskets in it, and it would be kind of nice. Make things a little bit easier. I think the tightness of this screw can also adjust the pumping action a bit. Like if I loosened it up, it would allow more airflow, I believe. So there might be some level of adjustment internally that you can do on these paint sprayers. There's the fully complete pipe. It is glorious. Very excited about its piping action. And there's a little tiny gasket that I was talking about. You got to remake them. What can you do? There are easier ways to do it, I'm sure, but I just kind of draw it out and cut it out. You can also see the level of polish that I'm going for. It's nothing so crazy that it's just almost distracting. And that's just what I like to do. I'm also putting this pipe on. This will determine how much you've been paying attention, but this pipe is going on in reverse from when I first took it off. That's because the motor I have has like a large switch and capacitor housing that I think is going to get in the way if the pipe was facing over the motor itself, which is how it was originally designed. So I'm just going to switch this around. I don't think it really matters anyways. But Dr. Spraymore, the original inventor, can come and haunt my dreams and tell me I'm a piece of human garbage because of my life choices. There you just saw me replace the paper oil gasket wax things that I took off and replace them just with pure oil resistant rubber. I'm just not even going to take a chance on some weird material like that. I might as well just seal it up amazingly with a nice thin rubber gasket. I also found some nice brass replacements for the oil plugs. You might as well. So this is the power transfer doohickey. It's kind of like a clutch mechanism, and that's how it was originally powered. It wasn't powered by the pulley that I actually took off at the start of this video. You'll see in a photo of when I turn this on what the attachment from the motor shaft to the actual shaft of the tool is.
Laser noises, laser noises. It's lasering the paint off of the brass.
So I went to my local makerspace and asked them to laser off paint in a very specific way off of a piece of brass. You then soak this piece of brass upside down, floating on top, in ferric chloride. Ferric chloride is an acid that will eat away at the brass, but not the painted areas, leaving the painted areas high and the etched away areas low, which you can then fill with paint, sand the high spots off, and you have yourself a nice sensual brass tag. I made this nice and thick because the thicker the brass tag, the better of a human being you are. So I went for fairly thick. I just hit it with a coat of black, waited for dry, and then hand painted the red in. I didn't even have to be accurate since I'm sanding off the tops of it. Sand away like crazy, and you're pretty much done. And this was honestly the exact same process that was done 100 years ago. They acid etched all of these little brass tags in this same method, except instead of a laser, they used a printing press. So you can do this with an inkjet printer. It's just a little more complicated, but still fun. I hope to do more of that. There in the top right, you can see the only original photo that I could find of this thing. And you can see the power transfer options. And it works. I diluted some paint, I think way too much, but whatever. And then I switched to a drill power because the motor that I did have was just insanely fast. It's way too fast. Way too fast. I thought it was going to die. So it kind of works. It's not too bad. Maybe my little airbrush is garbage too. But I had fun with this one. It was a nice little project for a change. Nothing massive like an entire washing machine. So it's nice to do this every once in a while. I thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Thank you very much. Later.